What happens when a late night host famous for playful chaos welcomes a guest who seems to have forgotten how to laugh? That question hovered in the air the moment the cameras rolled on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen. The audience had arrived expecting cheeky games, glittering gossip, and the kind of reckless fun the show was built on. Instead, they became witnesses to something sharper, more dangerous, a conversation that slowly twisted into a duel, a host fighting to keep control of his stage, and a guest who seemed intent on setting it on fire in real time. By the end of the night, there was no confusion about what they had watched. This wasn't another quirky celebrity appearance. It was the night Andy Cohen asked a prince to step off his set. The studio glowed with its signature chaos. Neon signs washed the walls in electric color, reflecting off shelves cluttered with books, liquor bottles, and strange souvenirs collected from a decade of unpredictable guests. The iconic red 8C marquee pulsed beneath the main screen, which flashed the familiar logo. Off to the right, a fully dressed Christmas tree sparkled under studio lights, its ornaments flashing like tiny galaxies. The audience sat practically within arm's reach of the set, cocktails balanced in their hands, already warmed up and laughing before the show even properly began. The carpet beneath their feet was striped in loud reds, blues, yellows, and oranges like a spilled rainbow that no one had bothered to clean up. The room felt intimate, loud, unruly, unmistakably Andy. Andy Cohen sat in his usual slate blue chair, question cards stacked neatly in one hand. A familiar, mischievous half-smile rested on his face, though tonight it didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked sharper, more measured than usual, his grey suit crisp, his posture straighter. This wasn't a reality star or a Bravo superfan across from him. This was royalty or something like it, depending on which headline you believed. Prince Harry sat opposite him in a matching chair. He wore a dark navy suit with an open collar white shirt, no tie, no ornaments. One ankle rested over his knee, hands loosely folded, but everything about him felt coiled and contained. His jaw tightened as he scanned the set, the neon Empire State Building print, framed photos, kitschy memorabilia. His expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. Andy turned toward the camera, bright smile snapping into place. Welcome back, you guys. Tonight is wow. We've had a lot of guests in this clubhouse, but I don't think we've ever had someone whose grandmother was literally on the money. Please welcome Prince Harry. The room erupted. Applause, whistles, disbelief. Harry lifted a hand in a half-hearted wave and offered a brief smile that never reached his eyes. Harry, thank you for being here, Andy said warmly. Harry dipped his head once. I thought it was time, he replied coolly, that someone brought a bit of class to late-night television. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, unsure if they'd just heard a joke or an insult. Andy's eyebrows flicked upward for a split second before he let out a controlled chuckle. I'll take that as a compliment. We do have cocktails hanging off a Christmas tree, so we're halfway classy. The laughter returned, thinner now, threaded with curiosity and the first faint taste of tension. So, Andy continued, glancing down at his cards, you've done some very serious interviews lately. Netflix, Oprah, global sit-downs. What made you say yes to this madhouse? Harry shifted in his seat, rolling his shoulders. People think they know me from those, he said. I wanted to remind them I'm not just a sound bite in someone else's documentary. Instead, you're a sound bite on my messy Bravo show. Andy shot back with a grin. At least here? Harry said, smirking slightly. The expectations are low. The audience laughed again, but this time it landed awkwardly. Andy's smile tightened, though he let it pass. Let's talk about life in the States, he said, pivoting smoothly. You've settled in California. How different does it feel from palace life? Harry glanced toward the monitor and back. Well, in California, when people ask how you are, they don't expect you to lie, he said. That alone feels like an upgrade. A low hum spread through the room. So you don't miss it at all? Andy asked. The pageantry, the duty. Duty is just a nice word. Harry cut in, voice flat. It makes control sound noble. The room fell quieter. But there must be something you miss. Andy tried, the balcony moments, trooping the collar. Those iconic images. Harry's lips curled. Iconic for who? He asked. For the press that sold them. Or for people who like to project fairy tales onto a family that can barely function. A murmur rolled through the audience. Andy leaned back slightly, recalibrating. Some people love those moments because they saw your mother there. Andy said gently. Does that change it for you? For the first time, Real emotion flickered across Harry's face. Sharp, bright, unmistakable. Annoyance. There it is, he muttered. I was wondering how long it would take before we got to my mother. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, Andy said, voice softer now. Harry's eyes narrowed. A lot of viewers think that, because they felt connected to her, they're entitled to dissect my trauma on cable television. He snapped. People love to talk about empathy. What they actually want is access. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The laughter was gone. The chaos had quieted, and the real fight had just begun. Andy lifted one hand, not in defense but as a quiet signal to steady the air between them. His voice stayed calm. I hear what you're saying, but you've chosen to speak about her in your book and in interviews. Isn't that also your version of access? Harry let out a short, humorless laugh. When I talk about her, I'm telling my story, he said. When you bring her up on a neon set between commercial breaks, you turn her into content. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, vibrating. No one laughed, no one moved. Andy drew a measured breath, eyes flicking briefly toward the camera before returning to his guest. This is a television show, Harry, he said quietly. Everything we talk about here is content. That's just how this works? Exactly? Harry replied, without hesitation. That's why I don't owe it anything. Andy's lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded once. Behind the cameras, he could almost feel the control room erupting. Producers gesturing, voices rising, hands flying in the air. He pivoted smoothly. Let's change gears, he said, keeping his tone brisk but gentle. How's life with Meghan these days? People have a lot of opinions. How do you both handle that? Harry's expression hardened instantly. People having opinions about my wife isn't a personality trait, he said. But they act like it is. They sit on couches, scroll headlines, sip wine, and somehow decide they're experts on a woman they've never met. Andy attempted a light smile. But you did choose to share a lot of your story publicly. Yes, Harry shot back. Our version. Not the palace-approved, tabloid-polished version. And guess which one people still choose to believe? The audience shifted in their seats. A few people lifted their drinks like shields. Andy glanced down at his cards and quietly skipped 2 questions with the flick of his thumb. Let's go a little lighter, he said. This is Bravo after all. We're obligated to talk about pop culture. He gestured vaguely. You're in Montecito. Are you and Meghan reality TV people? Any love for the Real Housewives franchise? Maybe a royal cousin popping up somewhere? The audience chuckled, grateful for the attempted release of pressure. Harry didn't join them. Reality television is just the palace without titles, he said coolly. People performing dysfunction for an audience that pretends they're above it. The laughter died on impact. Andy blinked. What so? No housewives? Harry's mouth twisted. I already lived in a house full of people backstabbing each other in designer clothes, he said. I don't need a subscription to experience it again. Somewhere behind the cameras, someone muttered a curse. The tension thickened, curling through the air and wrapping itself around the set like fog. Andy inhaled slowly, centering himself. He'd refereed screaming matches between reality stars. He'd handled live walk-offs and explosive on-air fights. But this was different. This wasn't camp. This wasn't spectacle. This was a guest who seemed determined to dismantle everything around him. The questions, the format, the room. All right, Andy said steadily, let me ask you this. Do you ever worry that in trying to escape one system, royalty, tradition, the institution you've described, you stepped straight into another? Hollywood, streaming deals, book tours. Is there a part of you that wonders if you traded one stage for another? Harry leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. The difference, he said slowly, is that now I choose which stage I stand on. And you chose this one tonight, Andy replied, gesturing lightly toward the glowing set, the neon, the cameras, the blinking red signs. Harry shrugged, that maddeningly casual motion. I chose it because I thought it might be refreshing, he said. I didn't realize we were going to dress tabloid questions up in glitter. A sharp exhale rolled through the audience. Andy's fingers tightened around his question cards. Oh, we're definitely sparkling tonight, he said lightly. His eyes, however, had cooled. Good thing we've got more questions. The band's bumper sting played as the camera pulled out wide, capturing the candy-colored set and the storm brewing at its center. The screen faded to commercial, but in the studio no one shifted, no one relaxed. Andy shot a glance toward his producers, who were already speaking urgently into his earpiece. "Keep pushing," they urged. "This is gold." He straightened his jacket, looked back at the man in the navy suit, and understood this wasn't going to be a normal episode. When the cameras came back up, the red HE lights seemed brighter. The applause swelled on cue, but it sounded thinner now, nervous, cautious. The Christmas tree still glittered. The neon skyline still shimmered, but the air felt charged, as though every ornament and bottle was holding its breath. Andy sat taller in his chair, the usual playful looseness replaced by focus. Across from him, Harry looked unchanged by the break, arms loose, eyebrows slightly raised, as if daring the next question to be worth his time. "Welcome back to Watch What Happens Live," Andy said smoothly. "We're here with Prince Harry, and things are getting honest tonight." A fragile ripple of laughter passed through the audience. Andy glanced down at his cards. "Let's talk about America. You've been here for a few years now. You've talked about privacy, about escaping pressure. Do you feel like you found that?" Harry's lips tightened into a thin smile. "Americans have a very interesting definition of privacy," he said. "You build gates the size of castles and still expect people not to look inside. That's one way to put it." Andy replied. "I didn't come here to be adored." Harry continued, his voice clipped. "I came here to be left alone. Those two things don't exist easily in this country," Andy said, nodding slowly. "But you've signed major media deals. You've published a memoir. You've done global interviews. Some people would argue those choices invite attention instead of pushing it away." Harry leaned forward, eyes sharpening. "People love saying that," he snapped. "It makes them feel clever, as if wanting to tell your story and wanting peace are somehow incompatible. They don't have to be," Andy said carefully. "But stepping into the spotlight repeatedly does complicate the message." "You mean it complicates the version of the story people like best?" Harry replied. "The one where I'm either a villain or an idiot. Reality tends to disappoint people who need things that simple." The audience shifted again. A crossed leg in the front row, the slow lift of a glass. The air felt tight. Andy's tone stayed measured but firmer. "Let's talk about your relationship with your family. You've said strong things about your brother, your father, the institution itself. Do you believe those relationships are beyond repair?" Harry's jaw flexed. They weren't exactly built to be fragile in the first place. "And yet," Andy pressed, "millions of people watched you walk behind your mother's coffin beside your brother. They saw a bond. They believed in it. They believed an image," Harry replied. "Not the reality behind it." "So there's no hope?" Andy asked. "No door left open?" Harry shrugged, casual, almost cruel in its ease. "That depends on whether honesty is welcome in that house. History suggests it isn't." A soft murmur rolled through the crowd, some sympathetic, some uneasy. Andy inhaled slowly. "A lot of viewers feel conflicted. They empathize with your pain, but they also wonder if public accusations, especially against family, cross a line." "How do you answer that?" Harry's eyes flashed. "Pain doesn't become less real just because it makes people uncomfortable." "Of course," Andy said, "but there's also the reality of consequences." Harry tilted his head. "That sounds like a warning." "It's the nature of public life," Andy replied evenly. "Every word you say has weight." "Funny?" Harry said. "That concern never seemed to matter when tabloids were free to write whatever they wanted about me or my wife." Andy paused, then nodded. "Let's talk about Meghan." A collective intake of breath swept the audience. "You've defended her fiercely from the beginning," Andy said. "Some people see that as admirable, others see it as divisive. Do you think things might have unfolded differently if you hadn't drawn such a hard line so publicly?" Harry's voice sharpened instantly. "So now it's my fault she was attacked?" "No," Andy said quickly. "That isn't what I meant. It's what people always mean," Harry replied. "There's an endless hunger to analyze my marriage like it's a political experiment, as if protecting my wife is some strategic misstep." Andy leaned forward slightly. "I'm asking about strategy, because you're operating in a world where narrative is power. You're not just reacting anymore. You're influencing public conversation." Harry let out a short, bitter laugh. "You give me far too much credit. The script was written long before I ever spoke. I'm just a character walking through it." "That sounds like avoiding responsibility," Andy said. "Or recognizing the limits of it," Harry countered. Andy's eyes flicked briefly toward the camera. The show was crossing a line. Too intense for late night, too raw to feel safe. But no one in the room was looking away. "Let me ask something more personal," Andy said quietly. "Do you ever regret how publicly everything unfolded? The interviews, the book, the fallout? Do you ever think, I should have done this differently?" For the first time, Harry hesitated. It was subtle, only a fraction of a second, but it was there. "Regret is a luxury for people whose voices are still intact," he said finally. "Mine was taken from me piece by piece. I did what I had to do to keep it, and the people who feel hurt by what you said." Andy asked, "Your father? Your brother? They made their choices," Harry snapped. "Just like I made mine." Andy studied him. "You don't sound at peace with those choices." Harry's eyes narrowed. "And you don't sound neutral anymore." A ripple moved through the room. "I'm a host," Andy said, straightening. "It's my job to ask difficult questions. And it's my job," Harry replied coolly, "to decide which ones deserve answers." The temperature seemed to drop another degree. Andy shifted again, searching for balance. "Let's talk about your mother. Not the way you feared earlier, but in terms of legacy. What part of Diana do you see most in yourself today?" Harry's face hardened, the part that couldn't survive that world. The room fell silent. "She wanted to protect her children," Andy said gently. "Do you think she would approve of how you've chosen to fight back?" Harry stared at him, eyes burning. "You don't get to speculate about what my mother would think," he said quietly. "Not here. Not ever." For the first time, Andy's voice lost a trace of its warmth. "You've brought her into this conversation many times before. And that doesn't give you ownership of her memory." Harry cut in sharply. The audience shifted again, discomfort now visible. The glittering set felt almost mocking against the severity of the moment. Andy set his cards down on the small table between them. "You see," he said evenly, "this is what people struggle with. The line between boundaries and deflection, between vulnerability and shutting down. And this," Harry said, gesturing subtly around the neon and glass, "is what I struggle with, turning human lives into segments." Silence stretched. The band played a soft, uncertain bumper as Andy turned slowly toward the camera. "We're going to take another quick break," Andy said, turning slightly toward the camera. "When we come back, we'll take viewer questions. If Prince Harry is up for it." Harry's mouth curved into a slow, unreadable smile. "We'll see." As the lights dimmed for commercial, a low buzz filled the studio. Producers whispered urgently into their headsets. Audience members leaned toward each other, their murmurs rising and falling. Andy remained in his chair, jaw tight, staring at the floor for a brief beat before lifting his eyes back to Harry. For the first time all night, it was no longer about a difficult guest. It was about whether the show itself could still hold the line. The lights snapped back to full brightness. The band hit their familiar upbeat return music, but it sounded hollow now, too cheerful for the tension wrapped around the set. The applause sign flashed insistently. The audience clapped, but it wasn't warm. It was hesitant. The sound people make when they're unsure whether they're applauding entertainment or witnessing a slow, motion collision. Andy lifted his question cards again, but his posture had changed. He wasn't leaning back anymore. He was leaning forward, alert, engaged, guarded. "Welcome back," he said quietly. "We're taking viewer questions now. These come directly from the audience at home." Harry nodded once. Andy read the first card. "This is from Brooklyn, Prince Harry. Do you believe you've fully accepted that you're no longer a working royal? Or do you still feel tied to that identity?" Harry let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "That question alone tells me people still don't understand how deeply that role was carved into me. But have you accepted it?" Andy pressed. "I've survived it," Harry replied. "Acceptance suggests I had a choice." Andy tilted his head. "Didn't you?" Harry's eyes hardened. "Do you honestly believe leaving was optional once certain lines were crossed?" Andy didn't look away. "I believe you made a decision. Forced or not, it was still a decision that reshaped millions of lives, not just yours." A ripple moved through the audience. Andy moved on before the moment could stall. "Next question. This one from Chicago. Why do you continue to speak about the royal family if you say you want distance from them?" Harry's jaw tightened. "Because silence never protected me." "But speaking hasn't either," Andy replied. "That depends on what you define as protection." Harry shot back. If you mean comfort, no. If you mean survival, absolutely. Andy's tone stayed calm, but an edge crept in. Some people would argue survival doesn't require public storytelling on this scale. Harry turned slightly in his chair, shoulders squaring. Some people have never had their entire life curated by an institution. Andy didn't retreat. And some people have lost parents, siblings, privacy, and dignity without global media deals to help them process it. The room went still. Harry's eyes flashed. So now we're comparing traumas. I'm questioning narrative framing, Andy said evenly. Harry shook his head. You're questioning credibility. I'm questioning consistency, Andy said, firmer now. Harry exhaled sharply. Those usually mean the same thing when someone is determined not to listen. Andy's jaw tightened. He lifted another card. This one is from a military family in Texas. He read, You've spoken about your service with pride. Do you feel the controversies surrounding your private life have overshadowed that part of your identity? For a flicker of a second, something in Harry's expression softened. Not weakness, but something bruised and human. Then the wall went back up. My service doesn't belong to the media cycle, he said. It belongs to the people I serve beside, and yet you've spoken about it publicly many times. Andy noted. Yes, Harry snapped, to honor them, not to decorate controversy. Andy studied him. Do you feel your public behavior always reflects that intention? Harry stiffened. Are you questioning my integrity? I'm questioning impact, Andy replied. Harry's voice rose for the first time. Impact is not something you control once the machine starts chewing. And yet you keep feeding it. Andy shot back. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. Even the band members froze. Harry leaned forward, elbows nearing his knees. Let me be very clear. If I stop speaking, the narrative doesn't stop. It just continues without me in it. At least now, I'm not voiceless. Andy leaned forward too. And what about the people who don't get to tell their side at all? They've been telling it for centuries, Harry said. Through power, Andy replied, not testimony. Silence dropped between them. Andy drew a slow breath and lifted the next card. His voice cooled, losing the last of its playful edge. From London, Do you still believe reconciliation with your family is possible? Harry didn't answer immediately. The audience leaned forward as one. Reconciliation requires mutual accountability, he said finally. Right now, I see very little of that. And your own accountability? Andy asked gently. Harry looked straight at him. I've torn my life open in ways most people wouldn't survive. If that isn't accountability, then your definition is impossible. Andy gave a small nod, but there was no agreement in it, only resolve. He lifted the final card. One last question, he said, voice steady. This comes from a former volunteer at Princess Diana's charity. Do you worry that your very public battles may distort your mother's legacy instead of protecting it? The shift in the air was instant. Harry's expression tightened as anger, grief, and something more dangerous flashed across his face. That question never should have been read, he said sharply. It's a live show, Andy replied without raising his voice. Viewers ask what they ask, and you choose what you amplify. Harry shot back. Andy straightened in his chair. Harry, the entire foundation of this program is asking the questions people aren't supposed to ask. That's the point. You're exploiting her memory, Harry said coldly. And you've built a public identity around invoking it. Andy answered, just as quietly. The words landed like glass. The audience didn't gasp. They didn't whisper. They didn't move. Silence fell so completely it felt physical. Harry stared at him, not shocked by the accusation itself, but by how plainly it had been spoken. You crossed a line, he said. So have you? Andy replied, repeatedly, on air. The air between them felt brittle, electric, ready to shatter. You invited me here to ambush me, Harry said, leaning back slowly. I invited you here to talk, Andy said. You turned every question into a battlefield? Harry gave a bitter laugh. And yet you kept pushing. Because deflection isn't dialogue, Andy said. The audience began to stir, uneasy shifts, low whispers, discomfort now visible. The warm holiday lights and cheerful set decor felt surreal against the intensity unfolding between them. Andy placed the last card on the table. One final question, he said quietly. Harry said nothing. Andy met his eyes directly. Do you want to be understood, or do you want to keep fighting ghosts? For the first time all night, Harry had no immediate reply. The pause stretched impossibly long. The band didn't move. The audience barely breathed. Harry's lips parted, but before he could speak, the commercial lights flickered on. This time, the tension didn't fade. It sharpened. Both men understood what was at stake. Whatever happened next would decide how this night ended. The red ONAR light snapped back to life. They sat in silence for 2 full seconds, an eternity in live television. Andy broke it first. Before the break, he said evenly, "I asked whether you want to be understood, or whether you want to keep fighting ghosts." Harry didn't look at him. He looked past him, toward the cameras, the audience, the unseen millions watching. "People like you?" Harry said slowly. "Always think you're entitled to answers. You think a platform gives you ownership of my life?" "No," Andy replied calmly. "A platform gives space for questions. Ownership comes from how you choose to respond." Harry let out a short, humorless laugh. "Then maybe you should choose better questions." Andy's eyes hardened. "And maybe you should choose better answers." The audience shifted again. Quiet murmurs spread through the room. Harry leaned forward, his voice finally sharp. "This entire show thrives on spectacle, on provocation. Don't pretend this is about truth." Andy placed his cards down deliberately. "You agreed to this conversation," he said firmly. "You've deflected every serious question, turned accountability into performance, and treated this process like an attack. I've been patient, I've been respectful. But this," he gestured between them, "is no longer a conversation. So now you're silencing me?" Harry scoffed. "No," Andy said slowly. "I'm ending a situation that stopped being productive." He turned slightly toward the audience, then back to Harry. "This show is called Watch What Happens Live. What happened tonight is that a guest refused to engage in good faith." Harry stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake." Andy stood as well, calm and deliberate. "The mistake," he said, "was letting this continue after it stopped being about dialogue." The room went completely silent. "Prince Harry," Andy said clearly, "this interview is over. I'm asking you to leave the set." A collective gasp swept through the audience. Harry stared at him, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're kicking me out?" "Yes," Andy answered, meeting his eyes without hesitation. For a heartbeat, it looked as if Harry might explode. Instead, he gave a tight, bitter smile. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You finally got your headline." He turned and walked off set, past the chairs, past the glowing decorations, past the frozen band, disappearing from view. The camera stayed on Andy. He took a breath and faced the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said softly, "we'll be right back." The music rose, but the damage had already been done. What began as a celebrity appearance ended as one of the most tense walk-offs late-night television had ever witnessed. History frozen live.